Every depression in history has destroyed the majority and enriched the few. Not because the few were lucky, because they owned the right things before the collapse arrived. In 1929, 90% of Americans lost everything, but a small number walked out of the wreckage wealthier than they went in. In 2008, millions lost their homes, but those holding the right assets doubled their fortunes within 5 years. The difference was never timing. It was never genius. It was positioning, owning what the crisis could not destroy. And if the next depression is closer than you think, you need to understand what those assets are before everyone else figures it out.
Welcome to the financial system. Control the money, control the history. And remember, simple is never easy. Before we talk about what to own, you need to understand what a depression actually does. It doesn't just lower prices, it rearranges ownership. Deflation crushes debtors, businesses fail, wages collapse. But the assets themselves, the land, the gold, the infrastructure, they don't vanish, they change hands. They transfer from the desperate to the prepared. That is the brutal engine of every downturn in history. Wealth doesn't disappear in a depression, it moves.
And it moves toward whoever holds things of real, enduring value. So here are 6 assets that history, not theory, not speculation, but documented evidence, shows have doubled wealth during the worst economic collapses the world has ever seen. The first is physical gold and silver. Not paper gold, not ETFs, not a number on a screen. Physical metal you could hold in your hand. In 1933, when the Great Depression was tearing America apart, Franklin Roosevelt confiscated citizens' gold at $20.67 per ounce, then immediately revalued it to $35. The government understood what most people didn't. Gold was the one asset they couldn't print, couldn't inflate, and couldn't control unless they physically seized it. In Weimar, Germany, an ounce of gold went from the equivalent of a few hundred marks to over 87 trillion marks by 1923. Those who held gold didn't just preserve their wealth, they became the new rich, while everyone around them burned through wheelbarrows of worthless paper. In every currency collapse, from Rome's debasement to Zimbabwe's hyperinflation to Lebanon in 2020, the pattern is identical. Paper promises dissolve. Metal endures. Gold and silver are not investments in the traditional sense. They are insurance against the failure of everything else. And in a depression, that insurance pays off at multiples. The second asset is productive farmland. This is the one almost nobody talks about, and it's the one with the most consistent track record across centuries. After the Black Death killed nearly half of Europe in the 1340s, the economy collapsed. Trade froze, cities emptied, but land, farmland that could produce food, became the most valuable asset on the continent. Survivors with liquidity bought abandoned estates for fractions of their former price. Peasants became landowners for the first time in history. During the Great Depression, while stocks fell nearly 90%, well-positioned farmland held value because people still had to eat. In the 2008 crisis, farmland prices barely dipped while every other asset class collapsed, and then they surged. The reason is simple. Farmland produces something essential. You can't eat stocks. You can't live inside a bond. But land that grows food has value in any economy, under any government, in any currency. It is the oldest store of wealth on earth, and depressions only make it more valuable. The third asset is distressed real estate, but not the way most people think about it. During a depression, real estate doesn't just fall, it collapses. People lose jobs, can't make payments, and are forced to sell at any price. Banks foreclose and dump properties. After the 2008 financial crisis, home prices in parts of America fell 50 to 70%. Those who had cash, not credit, not leverage, but actual cash, bought homes for pennies on the dollar. By 2015, those properties had doubled or tripled in value. The same pattern played out after the Great Depression. In the 1930s, distressed properties in New York and Chicago sold for 10 cents on the dollar. By the 1940s, they were worth multiples of the purchase price. The lesson is harsh but clear. Depressions are the greatest real estate buying opportunities in history, but only for those who enter the crisis with liquidity, not debt.
If you are leveraged when the crash hits, you become the seller. If you hold cash, you become the buyer. The difference is generational wealth.
The fourth asset is essential goods companies. During the Great Depression, the stock market fell nearly 90% from peak to trough. Most companies were devastated, but a specific category survived, and some thrived. Companies that provided things people could not stop buying: food, utilities, basic household goods. Procter & Gamble didn't just survive the Depression, it grew. Campbell's Soup actually increased revenues while the economy collapsed around it. Utility companies maintained dividends because people still needed electricity and water even in the worst year of the worst downturn. The same pattern repeated in 2008. While banks and real estate companies imploded, consumer staples stocks held their value and recovered fastest. During Japan's lost decade in the 1990s, companies producing daily necessities outperformed every other sector by wide margins. The principle is timeless. People stop buying luxuries in a depression. They never stop buying food, soap, and heat. The fifth asset is short-term government treasury bonds, but only in the right phase of the crisis. This is the asset most people misunderstand. In the early stages of a depression, when deflation takes hold and panic sets in, money floods into government bonds. In the Great Depression, U.S. Treasury bonds were one of the only assets that gained value as stocks collapsed. Between 1929 and 1932, long-term Treasury bonds returned over 30%, while the stock market lost 89%. The flight to safety pushed bond prices up as interest rates crashed to near zero. In 2008, the same thing happened. As Lehman Brothers collapsed and the world froze, Treasury bonds surged. But here is the critical warning. Bonds are an early crisis asset, not a late crisis one. Once governments begin printing money to fight the depression, and they always do, inflation eventually returns, and bonds become a trap. Those who held bonds too long in the 1940s watched inflation quietly devour their returns for decades. The skill is knowing when to hold them and when to exit into hard assets. History rewards those who understand the sequence. The sixth asset is the one that cannot be confiscated, cannot be inflated, and cannot be taxed into oblivion: productive skills. In every depression, every collapse, every currency failure in history, the people who rose fastest were not just those who held gold or land. They were the ones who could produce value when everyone else was paralyzed. After the Black Death, craftsmen who could build and repair commanded wages that would have been unthinkable a generation earlier. During the Great Depression, the mechanic who could fix an engine, the farmer who could grow food, the tradesman who could build shelter, these were the people who never went hungry while bankers jumped from windows. In the Confederate collapse, when grayback currency became toilet paper, it was the blacksmiths, the cobblers, the weavers who still had something the world needed. Skills are the ultimate depression-proof asset because they exist outside the financial system entirely. No central bank can print them, no government can confiscate them, and no market crash can erase them. Now here's what ties all six together. None of these assets are exciting. None of them are trendy. You won't see them promoted on social media or hyped by financial influencers, and that's precisely the point. The assets that protect wealth in a depression are the ones that produce real value, hold tangible worth, or meet essential human needs. They are boring, they are old, and they are the only things that have consistently survived when everything else was wiped out. The pattern across every depression in recorded history, from Rome to Weimar to the 1930s to 2008, is the same. The majority enters the crisis holding paper promises, stocks at all-time highs, speculative bets, digital tokens, savings in currencies being debased. And the minority enters things that cannot be printed, cannot be defaulted on, and cannot lose their function. When the dust settles, ownership has shifted. The many have less, the few have more. And the divide was decided not during the crisis, but before it. The question is not whether another depression is coming, debt cycles, asset bubbles, currency debasement. History tells us they always end the same way. The question is what you will be holding when it arrives, promises or something real. History doesn't repeat, but if you ignore it, it will crush you all the same. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. Its financial system and history leaves clues. I show you where the money leads.